Good afternoon, and welcome to another incredibly informative and timely Met webinar. Um, as you know, October 7th saw some of the most sadistic, savage attacks since the Holocaust in one single day. Um, this has been a very, very difficult period for Jews throughout the world. Many of us are wrestling with a great deal of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, abandonment, and betrayal. Um, right now, we have seen our institutions of higher education, or maybe I should call it lower education, erupt in sympathy for the Palestinian cause. Um, we had just heard from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres yesterday, who is calling for an immediate ceasefire from Israel and has said that the Palestinians have been under Israeli occupation for 56 years, totally ignoring the Gaza withdrawal of 2005. We're here today to speak with one of the most intelligent, thoughtful analysts that I know of, Alex Traiman. Alex and I have been friends, I think, for several years now, um, decades possibly. Alex is the CEO and the Jerusalem bureau chief of the wonderful JNS News. He has provided coverage and analysis of everything that's important in Israel. He has also been the producer of two award-winning films, Iranium, um, which was prescient, speaking about the work that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been doing for decades now on an Iranian nuclear bomb, and Honor Diaries, which addresses the treatment of Muslim women. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be able to discuss events with Alex Traiman. So, without further ado, this is Alex, and I want to first talk with Alex about the failed premises that have predicated most foreign policy concerning Israel and the Middle East of land for peace and what we've learned from the Gaza withdrawal. Alex?
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And yes, we've been friends for a long time, not too many decades, but but and the work you do at Emmet is just so critical to be educating people on the Hill, especially about what's going on in the Middle East. And these are the people that are making policy and are affecting what their bosses, their congressmen and their senators are saying and what they're doing. And so the work you're doing is critical, and I it's felt here in Israel, and it's greatly appreciated, and everybody should continue to support what you're doing. And it's a good segue into your question, because there's been a number of failed policies here that have led to this moment, and I think that we're in a time in which a lot of these misconceptions are going to now be reevaluated, or at least that there's an opportunity for them to be reevaluated. Um, it's a great opportunity. At the same time, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to try to double down on the same mistakes that led us to this moment. Yeah, and I'll get to a bunch of them, because I think that there are numerous misconceptions here in Israel. But let's start with first the widest ones, and the ones that also affect the United States and Europe and the rest of the international community. And there's really two fundamental issues here. The first one is the concept of the land for peace formula. Um, Gaza was the pilot project for the independent Palestinian entity. Israel used to have its military presence in Gaza. It had 21 vibrant Jewish communities in the Gaza Strip with 8,500 citizens. These were beautiful communities. I had been down to them, and they were like salt of the earth Jews living there, in this area called Gush Katif. And in 2005, Israel withdrew the entire civilian and military presence in Gush Katif. It essentially bulldozed over the towns and handed it over to the Palestinian Authority in the hopes that this would be the pilot for the independent Palestinian entity. This could lead to toward a two-state solution if the Palestinians could demonstrate that they could behave like nice and normal neighbors. People were talking about could Gaza turn into the Singapore of the Middle East, right? But instead of it turning into the Singapore of the Middle East, it turned into the Beirut and the Syria and the Lebanon and the Egypt of the Middle East. And within a short period of time in 2006, they had parliamentary elections in Gaza, and Hamas won those elections. And already by 2007, Hamas had orchestrated a complete takeover of the Gaza Strip, and Mahmoud Abbas, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, was sent out. And at the time of the disengagement, people said, if even one rocket gets fired on Israel, we're going to go back in. Well, here we are, tens of thousands of rockets later, and only now, after the worst massacre in Israeli history, is the IDF even discussing the idea of putting boots on the ground inside Gaza, and they still haven't even done it yet. But this concept of land for peace, is a concept now that I think is proven itself to be an utter failure. We're just 30 years now after the signing of the Oslo Accords, in which essentially all of Judea and Samaria, which is the Bible Belt, the heart of the state of Israel, Judea and Samaria, Jews are called Jews because they're from Judea. Every biblical city in the Torah took place in Judea and Samaria. And people, and when the Oslo Accords were signed, this area of Judea and Samaria was broken up into these non-contiguous zones, A, B, and C, and the authority was given over to the Palestinian Authority. And when you do that, we could see that not only has Oslo failed, but that it perhaps the only possible outcome would have been to perpetuate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that's what's happened. The second of these policies is to think that Iran could be brought into the community of nations. That ultimately that the leaders of Iran are responsible actors, and they just want to be treated like every other country, and that they've been treated too hard for too long. And if we just give them some money and let them have their civilian nuclear program, that they'll start to moderate themselves and behave like normal state actors. And instead, what we've seen is that they've taken every last penny that they have received from the international community and pumped it into a network of terror proxies all over the Middle East, which include the Houthis in Yemen, includes proxies in Iraq, in Syria, and of course Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and Hamas in Gaza. And they have created a ring of fire around the state of Israel. And even to this day, the United States, their primary policy objective is to reduce sanctions on Iran, and to just a month ago, or they promised $6 billion via Qatar in exchange for 5 U.S. hostages. Well, guess what? Maybe 5 hostages came back, but now Iran has promises for $6 billion, and their terror proxy Hamas has 222 additional hostages. So these are the two main misconceptions that have been the primary foreign policy objectives for the United States for decades, and they are responsible for this moment, this massacre of 1,400 Jews and 200 kidnapped and over 4,000 injured. But there's also a number of broken conceptions inside of Israel that need to be reevaluated, and that the first is that Israel can deter terror and terror organizations from attacking by being stronger. Well, guess what? The Israelis learned 2 weeks ago on October 7th that they did not have any deterrence, and that no amount of technology is going to be good enough to overcome the jihadi mentality and the desire to kill Jews that Hamas and Hezbollah have. And it's not just on the borders. It's not just in Gaza to the southwest of Israel. It's not just in Hezbollah in the north, to the north of Israel's border. You also have Hezbollah, and not Hezbollah. You have Hamas, and you have Palestinian Islamic Jihad and radical elements of Fatah inside Israel itself, in Judea and Samaria, and also in the mixed cities in Judea, in like Jerusalem and in Ramla, Lod, Akko, Haifa, and elsewhere. And so the jihad is not just right on Israel's borders, but it's even inside the borders. It affected the state itself. And so you can have F-35s and you can have surveillance. But at the end of the day, we see that surveillance can be fallible, intelligence can be fallible, and that the desire to kill Jews and institute jihad in the state of Israel and wipe Israel off the map cannot be deterred by your force. Also the idea of being able to kick the can down the road, to think that every time Hamas fires some rockets that you can just shoot back a little bit, either proportionally or a little bit more than proportionally, and restore deterrence for another period of time, and just put that little jihadi genie back into the bottle and think that it's not going to come out again. That all these conceptions have failed, and they're all going to be revisited in once this conflict is over.
Really glad that you mentioned Fatah, or the Palestinian Authority, because another misconception that so many people in the West have is that the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, is the moderate alternative to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Can you address that a bit?
Yeah, one of the biggest false narratives of this conflict so far is that Hamas is not Palestinians, Palestinians are not Hamas, there's innocent civilians here. Okay, Palestinians have a horrific track record of selecting terrorists as their leaders. That started with Yasser Arafat, and continues with Fatah and the Palestinian Authority to Mahmoud Abbas, who was the mastermind of the Munich massacre in 1972, who literally has a doctoral thesis on Holocaust denial that continues to incite Palestinians to attack Jews, that continues to name squares in Palestinian-controlled areas after so-called martyrs that died in the act of killing Jews, first-degree murder, that literally pays salaries to Palestinians that sit in Israeli jails for committing acts of terror, and pays stipends to the families of those who were killed in the act of committing first-degree murder against Israelis. So you just have the Palestinian Authority on the one, you have Hamas on the other. Now, Mahmoud Abbas is in year 18 of his 4-year term. You know why he hasn't held elections? Because he knows that if he would hold elections, that Hamas would win the elections. So why would Hamas win the elections if the Palestinian people are peaceful people? Hamas's charter is to destroy the state of Israel. So if people would vote for Hamas over the Palestinian Authority, where's you have to hold the people responsible. The people voted for Hamas in Gaza in 2006 and continue to vote for Hamas in Gaza. You haven't seen not one protest of Palestinians in the years since Israel pulled out in 2005, the 18 years. You haven't seen one mass protest against the government in Gaza. Okay, even though they all know that Hamas is taking money from the international community and using it to build terror tunnels and rockets, you still haven't seen any kind of uprising against the people like you've seen in Iran, for example, where people come out into the streets and protest their regime. That doesn't happen in the Palestinian Authority. That doesn't happen in Gaza. And when you look at the education system, that's been implemented throughout the Palestinian Authority. A lot of that is Palestinian Authority textbooks. Some of this is UNRWA, the only UN agency in the world that deals with the Palestinian conflict. The Palestinians have their own UN agency, and they run a lot of the schools, and we've seen the textbooks. The people that are 30 years old in the Palestinian Authority right now, they grew up learning math problems, which were along the lines of, if you have 5 Jews and you kill 2, how many Jews are left? And that's math. Okay. The people that are 30 years old in the Gaza Strip now in the Palestinian Authority areas now, they grew up watching a Mickey Mouse that in the last episode of the program before it went off the air, that Mickey Mouse died as a martyr, as a suicide bomber. There are camps, summer camps for 6-year-old kids in the Gaza Strip where they literally dress them up as terrorists, and they do plays where they're shooting Jews. Okay. So if Palestinian, and there are many Palestinians, by the way, that think that their leaders are corrupt, and they think that peace with Israel would be better than what they have. But do you know what type of independent thinking and mental gymnastics you have to go through in order to come to that conclusion? That takes a lot of effort, because they have been initiated to Jew hatred for decades. And the problem is that here in Israel is that you can't know who wants to make peace with you and who's a jihadi. Because also Hamas hides among civilians. So there's no way for any Israeli to know. And there are stories that keep coming out just about the October 7th attacks, that first of all, there were tons of civilians that came across with the so-called armed militants in uniforms or whatever. They just came across to participate in the jihad. And you have even more horrific stories of these Gazan workers that had work permits and visas to come into Israel. They were the ones providing intelligence to Hamas. And there are even stories of Gazans that were coming into kibbutzim in the south on a regular basis, and they were like the handyman of the kibbutz. And you have Israelis saying, this guy used to eat in my house. We'd have coffee together. We were friends. We thought we were friends. And they saw them in their kibbutz on October 7th, showing Hamas where all the houses were. And these guys were providing Hamas with information. How many houses are in kibbutz? Which houses have guns? Which houses have dogs? And so, how can you separate between the innocent civilians of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza and the militants when you have all these factors that need to be considered?
So glad you brought that up. Can you talk a little bit about what we've been hearing so frequently about how Israel has got to follow the rules of warfare, and about proportionality and moral equivalence? How do you define proportionality and moral equivalence? Does that mean Israel has to butcher babies and then burn them, rape women? How does one define this?
Where in history have we ever seen one party in a war that it did not initiate, by the way? Hamas declared war on the state of Israel. They murdered 1,400 people and kidnapped 200 others on a day that the last thing that Israel wanted to do was go to war. Like it was a holiday. Jews were in synagogue. They weren't thinking about war. Hamas launched a war in Israel, and now Israel's being asked to make sure that Gaza gets humanitarian aid. First of all, Israel doesn't landlock the Gaza Strip. Gaza has another border with Egypt. Okay. And the Egyptians and others should be the ones responsible for providing any humanitarian assistance. That's number one. Number two is that nobody's even letting the Gazans out. Okay. Israel's saying, well, we don't want to harm civilians, and civilians should leave. They should get out so that we can fight Hamas and not be in an arena with civilians. And the international community is locking the border and saying nobody out. Egypt saying not one Palestinian on our soil. Jordan saying not one Palestinian on our soil. The international community resettled 13 million refugees during the Syrian civil war, and they're not willing to take even one Palestinian. So they want to keep the Palestinians in Gaza, and then they want Israel to be responsible for humanitarian aid. And then part of the psychological warfare game that Hamas is playing is that for every civilian that gets killed under those circumstances, that Israel gets held responsible. And there can be no proportionality when you're under attack. Okay, there's no such thing as that. When you come in and you slaughter 1,400 people in the most barbaric ways possible, it just bringing up images of the Holocaust and ISIS, Al Qaeda, whatever, the worst things. This is what's Hamas. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked. I would not have been shocked if Israel said, you want proportionality. Netanyahu, who's so good at doing these like visual aids, like at the UN, he should have walked over to a chalkboard and wrote the number 1 and wrote equals, and on the other side written 1,000 and said proportionality is 1,000 to 1. But he's not going to do that, and that's not the standard that Israel's being held to. And this is one of the gross double standards that Natan Sharansky talked about when they talk about delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. And you're seeing all three of these things coming into play at the same time. And this is what Sharansky called the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism. So you see that when Israel kills a civilian, this delegitimizes Israel. Israel very quickly is turned from the victim on October 7th into the aggressor. This is demonization. And now this idea that Israel has to protect the Gazan civilians and provide them with humanitarian aid and operate according to rules of proportionality that nobody else is. Ukraine's not operating according to rules of proportionality. Nobody even mentions that word. This is a gross double standard.
Right now, the United States is estimating that perhaps 100 to 300 people were killed in that errant rocket attack launched by Palestinian Islamic Jihad from a parking lot. And the Hamas-controlled Gazan Health Ministry has claimed that there were 500 innocent civilians. How can anybody actually take seriously the reports of Hamas-controlled health ministers?
It's taken days for Israel to figure out, and even weeks. Even to this day, Israel has not come up with a final death tally of how many people died on October 7th. And yet, like just a week ago, there's an explosion in Gaza, and within seconds, there's a report that the IDF struck a Baptist hospital in the Gaza Strip and that 500 people were dead. Okay. And CNN ran with it. The New York Times ran with it. All the other mainstream media ran with it. Not only wasn't it a IDF strike on the hospital, it was a errant rocket fired either by Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas. It was a long-range missile that was supposed to try to reach Haifa. So it was a very long and powerful rocket. But not only wasn't it the IDF, it didn't even hit the hospital. Okay. It hit the parking lot outside the hospital. And you haven't seen any one photo of a hospital being hit. There's photos of the parking lot, and everybody can see that there's some shrapnel marks on the facade of the building, but the entire hospital is standing. And it hit the hospital parking lot at 1:30 in the morning. Okay. So how many people were standing in the parking lot of the hospital at 1:30 in the morning? And there are estimates that there were maybe 20 dead, and we can't even know if 20 were dead because we haven't seen. Okay. So I think people died in it for certain, and maybe up to 20. But so every single part of that narrative was wrong. That it wasn't the IDF. It didn't hit the hospital, and it wasn't a 500 people killed or even anything close to that. I'll just tell you, just my own case study of JNS that night. We were talking, it's 1:30 in the morning here in Israel. Word spread that the IDF had hit this hospital. Everybody's like putting their heads in their hands saying, wow, this is such a disaster. I can't believe this happened. The IDF would never want to do that. It's unbelievable. This can't be true. And then sure enough, the rumblings started to come out that it might not have been the IDF that did this. And so in real time at JNS, I was simultaneously, texting with one of the lead IDF spokespersons and one of the advisors to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was saying, we need a statement, to rebut this if this didn't happen. And it took them a little bit of time because they had to check. Okay, they had to check, and it's unbelievable the things that they had to check because the IDF is firing from so many different points. And for them to check with each one of the possible points that might have fired a missile into the Gaza Strip in that period and rule out each one of them, then gain surveillance footage to see that in fact it was this Hamas rocket that did like this U-turn, and then to also get this surveillance footage of a phone call between Hamas operatives. It took time, but unbelievable how fast they did it. But in any case, I had the statements from the IDF and the Prime Minister's office before they even tweeted them out, and we already had the article ready to go. And the second we got those quotes, they were inserted in the article, and JNS was actually the first media outlet to report that it was not an IDF strike on the hospital.
Okay, now is a great time for me to put in a plug for JNS. I really want all of our listeners to please support jns.org. Ahmed is all about truth, and JNS only reports on the truth. They have amazing journalists, and again, they work above and beyond. Also, speaking about truth, I have to plug what we're doing right now today. We have a wonderful person, Orgat, whose mother was killed, and his sister and sister-in-law are being held hostage. They were from a kibbutz in the Negev, and part of our team is taking him around Capitol Hill right now as we speak to please get the word out so that people don't forget about these horrific atrocities of October 7th. So please also support emetonline.org, and also remember we have a dinner coming up on December 5th. If you get your reservations in early, you will be able to take advantage of a discount, and we really do need to fill up the room and have some amazing honorees. So please look at our website and please support our dinner, support jns.org, and support Amet. We're working ourselves to the bone right now. So with that, I want to turn the podium over to someone who is going to be honored on December 5th, who will always remain my hero, aside from the fact that I'm married to a wonderful guy, Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who will read some of the questions that have come in and maybe have some questions of his own. Hussein? Oops. Hussein, are you there? I think Hussein might be having some problems. All right. So I will read you, I will think of some other questions of my own while we're waiting for Hussein.
There's some good questions here also in the Q&A.
Okay, let's see. Some questions here. Okay. To what extent is the Biden administration prioritizing the hostages and pressuring Israel to delay the ground invasion, or is it actually Israel's considerations that's causing the delay? Great question from my friend Ellen Heyman.
Yeah, so I think that both can be true at the same time. There were certainly a lot of logistics issues in the beginning of the call up, which I think delayed the implementation of a ground campaign. It took a lot of time, days, to mobilize 360,000 reserves in addition to the 150 to 180,000 members of the standing army, and then not just to get them equipment like vests and helmets and guns in many cases, also to put battle plans into place. Initially, the IDF wanted to try to gather as much intelligence as possible about where senior Hamas leaders could be, more information about the tunnel networks where Hamas operatives could be hiding, and also where the hostages might be located. And they were still trying to even identify, and even in the last couple of days, they continue to increase the number of individuals that they're reporting are officially held hostage by Hamas, because they were also doing these less reported small incursions inside the Gaza Strip, combing the area near the Gaza border, where they recovered numerous dead bodies. And and so until you know who died, you can't know who's alive inside the Strip. So it took a lot of time. And then it also became clear that that the Biden administration wanted to work on getting the hostages out. They have asked Israel for time, but there's other reasons why a ground incursion hasn't necessarily been launched straight away. The first is just the conditions under which a ground incursion would be launched. That the Gaza Strip is going to be, without question, a highly booby-trapped, difficult urban fighting environment. And right now, morale in Israel, for a swift victory is very high. But the one thing that could really sour the morale would be if IDF troops start going in and God forbid start meeting the assault rifles of Hamas operatives and terrorists that are basically waiting for them to come in. So the idea of trying to Israel and Israelis, they value the life of every soldier. This is a major difference between Israelis and Hamas. Hamas, they glorify death, and the best result, almost the greatest honor could be to die in the fight against the Jewish people, and to be murdering Jews and be murdered by Jews. And we don't have that in Israel. You just don't see that. Every family that has a child on the border, or a father or a brother or a best friend on the border, wants that soldier home safe and alive. So that's a very serious consideration. And an Israeli prime minister has to consider, he has 400,000 troops that he's responsible for. So you have to be very certain that you can accomplish your mission and without suffering huge losses. And then the other part of it is that Hezbollah and Iran have both threatened to get involved in the war if the IDF puts troops on the ground in Gaza. And there are the Israeli consideration of, can it fight two fronts simultaneously? And then also the American consideration, which is that they want to see this conflict contained just to the Gaza arena. So these are some of the considerations that are being taken. So I think that there are internal Israeli pressures for not launching the ground operation as of yet, and there are also foreign pressures preventing Israel from launching the ground operation. But it should be noted that even though you're not hearing one by one what targets were hit, thousands upon thousands of military targets have been identified and hit with precision accuracy in the Gaza Strip. You would not want to live in the Gaza Strip right now. The amount of destruction that the Air Force has leveled in the Strip against Hamas and its infrastructure has been devastating. I think perhaps it's one of the failings of the IDF has been communicating, just how powerfully they're hitting, and just how many losses Hamas is taking. And that would be part of the psychological warfare game that I think that the IDF and the government should be engaged in, which is to really let the world see Israel flexing its military might, the muscles, instead of leaving it to be ambiguous and only letting Hamas and Gaza be the ones dictating what's actually happening in the Strip, and just reporting however many casualties they want to say are dead.
Yeah. In order to survive in the Middle East, Israel has got to display deterrence and strength. Otherwise, they would just, can roll over. If they listen to Antonio Guterres and others, we could just roll over and play dead and be dead. So let's talk a little bit about the threat from Hezbollah and whether or not you feel, with the 150,000 missiles that Hezbollah has, some that have been converted into precision guided munitions, Israel has enough Iron Dome batteries to be able to cover both the south and the north?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the threat posed by Hezbollah is a much more potent threat than the threat posed by Hamas in Gaza. To a large extent, the southern arena is contained as it is. There's probably not much more damage that Hamas can do to the home front than it has already done. They continue to fire these Qassam rockets, and the Iron Dome shoots them out of the sky. They've actually put this laser defense system into testing mode. At least we've seen some videos of that. It looks like Star Wars. They were just shooting Qassam rockets out of the sky with lasers, but the missiles that Hezbollah has to the north are not the Qassam rockets. I mean, each Qassam rocket shouldn't be underestimated. It could kill dozens of people, and it's actually miraculous, A, that Israel has technology that can shoot these things out of the sky, but B, even the 400 rockets that have gotten through and have actually hit the ground in Israel, that there hasn't been mass casualty events left and right, because each one of these Qassam rockets could do incredible damage. Uh, but if you think that the Qassam rockets could do damage, the types of weapons that Hezbollah has, long range, precision guided, can deliver much larger payloads than the Qassam rockets. And they could put the Israeli home front not just on alert, and not just having people running into the shelters, but staying in the shelters for a long time and doing immense damage. And the other issue is that they have so many that even if you do have enough Iron Dome, and it's not Iron Dome that shoots down the long range. There's other technologies like the Arrow and the David Sling and Patriot missiles to a certain extent also that can shoot the long range missiles down. The Iron Dome is really just for the short range Qassam rockets. But even if you have enough missile defense for the amount of missiles that the Hezbollah has, if they start firing them in rapid fire sequence, it takes time to replenish. Like they're like semi-automatic, like Iron Dome. If you've been to an Iron Dome battery, you can load like 8 into each battery at a time, and then they have to be manually reloaded. It's not just like an AK-47 magazine where just the next one comes and the next one comes. So they could really overload the system even if the system is functioning. And in addition to that is the threat of Hezbollah ground troops. They have a much larger army than Hamas. Hamas sent over maybe as many as 2,500 on October 7th into Israel. Hezbollah could send tens of thousands of terrorists into Israel across the border, and the border is a lot longer, and the border is also a lot more challenging. The Gaza border is a flat border. The Hezbollah border is a hilly border. It's a hilly region. The South Lebanon overlooks northern Israel, so they have a strategic advantage of height, and there's also a lot of trees in the area where they can hide and get close to the fence before they come in. And that's the reason why Israel has evacuated all communities within 5 kilometers of the border. Right now, everybody talks about the displaced Gazans. There's over 200,000 Israelis right now that are displaced from communities along the Gazan border and from the southern Lebanon border. And so there's a very strong argument that could be made that Israel needs to take a preemptive strike on Hezbollah, not at this point that it would actually be a preemptive strike because the border is hot. The Hezbollah has been firing anti-tank guided missiles and mortars and has had its operatives coming up close to the fence, the border fence on multiple occasions, and they've been firing across, and the IDF's been firing back. They've killed at least 15 Hezbollah terrorists in the last week. So the border is already very active. And the thinking is that if you want to prevent the 150,000 missiles from being launched at Israeli cities, that you actually have to start striking at the targets first. And there is a lot more intelligence about where these missiles are located inside southern Lebanon than there might be in Gaza. And so, but of course, the Biden administration for certain doesn't want Israel to open up that front because they're worried about a wider regional conflict. And also there's the consideration of for Israel, can it fight two fronts at the same time? I think a powerful argument could be made: just contain the South right now. It's contained, let it be contained, and go to war against the North. But that hasn't happened as of yet. But it could happen. All it really takes is one trigger happy jihadi to fire, two long range missiles into Israel, and you could have a full-fledged war with Hezbollah.
So the ramifications are huge because we know Hezbollah is an Iranian-backed militia, terrorist organization, really. And we've seen recently that Iranian proxies have struck at American personnel in Syria, and that, the USS
And Iraq.
Eisenhower, right, and Iraq. And we see the that we're sending personnel into the region. We've sent two aircraft carriers. Um, how, first of all, what do you think is the role of U.S. personnel in this conflict, and what is the potential of this being a wider war?
Sure. Well, the first is that these aircraft carriers and other ships that the United States has in the region, they have significant missile defense capabilities on them. And we already saw the USS Carney, which was in the middle of the Red Sea, which shot down as many as 19 long-range missiles, that are being reported to carrying over 400 kilogram payloads, which is like 8 times what the Qassam rocket can deliver. That the USS Carney, fired 19 of these out of the sky when they were heading towards Eilat in southern Israel. And so certainly if Hezbollah would start firing rockets, and you talked about it before, like, does Israel have enough capacity to shoot these things down, that the U.S. ships that are stationed close by can assist in providing missile defense to Israel. So it can be very useful. The second is that you can't really predict where this war is going to go. I mean, the United States might be trying to contain it. Israel might be trying to contain it to the southern arena. But ultimately, you can only control your own side. And if Hezbollah decides, or Iran decides, that they want to be very active in this conflict, which they continually threaten to do, that Israel may have no choice as to be fighting on the northern border. And it is possible, especially if Iran continues to strike at U.S. targets in the region, that the United States could be at war with Iran. I mean, I'm not predicting. I think it's very difficult to make any predictions here, and that's the fastest way to lose your credibility as a journalist, is to make predictions. But there must remain the strong possibility that Hezbollah, Iran could enter the war. And you cannot rule out the possibility that the United States and its significant military presence in the region could be called into action, and even to potentially strike against Iran if the United States feels like it is getting attacked. Now, if you ask also what some of this personnel is doing or should be doing, and there's 2,000 troops that have been directed to the region in a non-combat role. I think the most important thing that they could be doing would be to facilitating humanitarian aid for Gazan refugees on the Egyptian side of the border. I think that if Israel is going to continue to pound at the Gaza Strip, that it must remain imperative to try to get that border open, and to let as many Gazans that don't want to be part of the conflict and don't want to be trapped in this Hamas run, hellhole, to be let out. And then U.S. troops should be there to be facilitating the relocation and of refugees and humanitarian aid for refugees.
Right. Okay. So, of course, the United States, after our disastrous war in Afghanistan and our disastrous retreat from Afghanistan, and the almost equally disastrous war in Iraq, is, of course, very war weary at this time, and they know that Iran is in cahoots with Russia and China and North Korea. Um, do you think that this could explode into um, more of a world war? And if that were the case, do you think that that would open up the door to tremendous amounts of anti-Semitism blaming Israel for bringing us into World War III?
Well, we clearly see that the world is taking sides, and that there is the allies of Israel, and you saw the president of the United States, Joe Biden. You saw Rishi Sunak, the prime minister of Great Britain, and Olaf Scholz, the chancellor of Germany, and President Emmanuel Macron of France, and Italian Prime Minister Meloni was here, and the Romanian Prime Minister, and the Greek Prime Minister. So you see that there's the allies of Israel, whether they're pressuring Israel or not, like they put their flags next to the Israeli flag and they've stood by the defense of Israel. And yet you've seen all these other countries around the world aligning with Iran, aligning with Hamas. That includes to a certain extent Russia, that includes to a certain extent China. Like you said, we've seen already proof of North Korean missiles and or explosives that were confiscated from the terrorists that came across into Israel on October 7th. So you have the Axis and the Allies, and not only that, but you see that individuals around the world are also taking sides, and you're seeing these mass protests against Israel. They're calling pro-Palestinian protests, but I'm not seeing any peaceful Palestinian resistance against the occupation inside the Palestinian controlled territories. So, and if you're doing pro-Palestinian rallies in the wake of the massacre, it means you support Hamas, you support what they did, and you don't support Israel's right to defend itself or to retaliate for those attacks. And so, in a way, there is this global discontent now over this issue, even much more so probably than when Russia first invaded the Ukraine. And you cannot predict where this thing goes, again, because you can only control your side. The international community, the only side that they can try to restrain is Israel. You can't count on Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran being restrained if they think that it's time to go. And yes, if Iran gets involved in this war to a greater degree than it has, I think Israel's going to have no choice but to get involved in it in a more aggressive way beyond the southern arena. And if that happens, anything is possible. If the United States gets involved, it could be that the United States has enough military strength to deter others, or it could also be that the same way that Hamas and Hezbollah are perceiving Israel to be weak, that other actors may be perceiving America to be weak, and they're resolved to be weak, and might think that this is the time to attack. And so you can't rule out any possibility right now.
Right, right. We saw with the war that Russia imposed on Ukraine that there are certain elements that have grown wary. Yeah, we believe that this supporting Ukraine is very valid, especially since we can defeat Russia without committing one American GI's boot on the ground. Um, Nonetheless, people grow war weary very quickly, and we're seeing that. I do have a fear because this is going to be a long, hard um, war. Do you have a fear that people's memories of October 7th will fade and be replaced with different memories and
So
images?
that's not a fear of the future. We're already seeing that happen. I think even from day two of this conflict, you could already see that the initial signs that public support and public opinion was shifting away. You already see what's going on at the United Nations, where the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, basically said that the Hamas atrocity didn't take place in a vacuum, and that they've been under occupation for 56 years. Of course, it's not relevant that Israel is not occupying the Gaza Strip, and these are the double standards that Israel gets held to. When Israel's inside, it's occupation. When Israel leaves, then it's an open air prison and it's apartheid and everything. So Israel really can't win, and we're already seeing the tide shifting from Israel being the victim that it was to Israel being the aggressor. This is the double standard. I worry that there won't be the weariness. I think Israel wishes that there would be war weariness if it would need to engage in a long, hard-fought war that took weeks, that took months. But I feel like the international community is very likely to not have a war weariness. And if they feel like Israel continues to attack, and if civilian casualties continue to mount, specifically because they refuse to allow civilians to leave the areas, that the world is going to continue to pressure Israel to stop. You're already hearing talks. Well, is the Biden administration supporting a ceasefire? Well, we're not supporting a ceasefire, but we're supporting humanitarian pauses, right? So what happens when these nations that supported Israel in the beginning of the conflict said we stand with you? Well, after a few weeks, and they say, well, we're growing tired of it, and we want you to stop, and we want you to stop now. And if you don't stop now, then all of the missile defense replenishment that we promise you is not going to come. Then Israel will be probably forced to stop if it loses its resolve.
What is it in the history of the Palestinians that has made the governments of Egypt and Jordan so reluctant to take in Palestinians?
Sure. Well, first is that even though I'll deal with them one at a time. Even though in Egypt, the regime of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is close to Israel, and he recognizes the power of the alliance with Israel, for regional stability and for his own security. Um, they in Egypt, they've never educated the Palestinian street to come. I mean, so the Egyptian street rather, to come along and support the state of Israel. So popular support for the peace treaty that Egypt has with Israel is very little. And if El, and El Sisi's been playing this mediator role over the last several years between Israel and Hamas and Gaza. And I think that if El Sisi would, put his cards with Israel, that this would be wildly unpopular. And their situation in Egypt is not that sturdy. So, I don't think that El Sisi wants to risk, a popular uprising. So that's why they don't want to take the Palestinians in. Also, it creates a huge security risk. If they just let everybody in, and nobody takes care of the situation, now Hamas just regroups on Egyptian soil, and then who's going to be responsible for that? So they don't want it. In Jordan, you have a different situation in which 65% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian, and the last thing that they need is another million Palestinians there. Meanwhile, even though the majority of Jordan is Palestinian, nobody talks about Jordan as being the Palestinian state. Nobody says, well, the small Hashemite regime that rules over millions of Palestinians is running an apartheid regime on the Palestinians. Even though Jordan was part of the original British mandate for Palestine, of which all was supposed to be a Jewish state, and was then cut off into two, Jordan, Transjordan, and Israel. And there's a lot of there's a strong case that could be made that Jordan not only should be but is the Palestinian state, and yet so the regime, even though they also rely on Israel for their security, King Abdullah II relies on Israel for his own survival day by day. They continue to incite against Israel in the public sphere at all times because they don't want to anger the Palestinian population there, and they really don't want to take any more Palestinians in that would shake up the already tilted balance of population in the favor of the Palestinians.
Right, right. Michael Kurtzak asked the $64 billion question with inflation now. And that is, what do you see as the end game for Israel? What did we do with Gaza and the West Bank, which is, I mean, it's impossible to read the tea leaves, when you're under attack like this, especially in the Middle East. But
Well, the fear is that the international community will try to leverage what's just happened, as an opportunity to say that the status quo is unsustainable, and that if you ever want to have quiet in the region, the only way to do that is with a Palestinian state. And so I think that if Israel doesn't like utterly destroy Hamas, that there could be significant diplomatic pressure on Israel to re-enter into the two-state paradigm, when that's exactly the opposite of the conclusion that one should reach by what has happened. In terms of the Gaza Strip, Israel has said that it wants to completely obliterate Hamas, and make it that when all is said and done, that not only does Hamas no longer have military capacity, no longer have motivation to attack Israel, but also is not in charge of governing the Strip. Um, there's talks about potentially handing that over to the Palestinian Authority, but that also should be a non-starter, because the Palestinian Authority controlled Gaza before Hamas took over, and they have a very suspect hold on power in Judea and Samaria. And Mahmoud Abbas is already in his mid to late 80s, and nobody knows what's going to be the day after Mahmoud Abbas. But the prevailing assumption is that he can't rule the Palestinian Authority forever. And there's the fears that even within Judea and Samaria, that things could get much more radicalized before they get any more peaceful. I think for Israel, it's clear that they are going to need to remain in military control of the Gaza Strip. Whether that looks like Area B in the Palestinian Authority, which is Palestinian municipal control and Israeli security control. Israel doesn't want to govern the Palestinians of Gaza. They don't want that. Even if they can acknowledge that it was a mistake to withdraw, they still don't want to have municipal control over the Palestinians that don't like them. Israel doesn't want to occupy any peoples. They don't want to occupy any places, even though this is their biblical homeland and it's not occupation. They're indigenous, and the only indigenous people in the world that gets called occupiers from living in their indigenous homeland. But I don't think Israel wants to control it. But we also have to see what the result of the war is. How many Gazan civilians are living in Gaza when it's all said and done. What state is Hamas actually in, and who else has entered the war? It's everybody's asking Israel for the end game, and I think it's a little bit unfair to be asking Israel to assess what the end game is going to be when it's only one party to the war and it can't know what the outcome of the fighting is going to be.
Well said, well said. And I think we've reached the end of our time. I want to remind everybody to please support the great work of jns.org, and also to support Amit. We really are working with no overhead. Everything goes, to the salaries of our people that are on the ground trying to tell the truth out there on Capitol Hill, and that's at ametonline.org. And please try to come to our dinner, where we have some amazing honorees. Congressman Richie Torres, who is incredible, Senator Michelle Blackburn, Congressman Mike Lawler, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, wonderful Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, and of course our own Hussein Abubakar Mansour. And that's going to be December 5th. Please register for the dinner. It's going to be a very memorable evening. And I cannot thank Alex enough for his wonderful, brilliant insight and analysis, and for the wonderful work of jns.org. Thank you so much, Alex Traiman.
Oh, thank you. The one thing, if I can just end off on one point, is that I will say that the morale inside Israel is very, very strong right now. We've really seen the country come together in a powerful way after this horrific tragedy. And not only that, we've actually seen the Jewish community in the United States, rush to Israel's support and aid in this time. And I think it's a very, very good opportunity to reevaluate the state of the relationship between Jews, both within Israel and in the diaspora, and between the two, and to use this as an opportunity for continued unity. When the Jewish people stand together as one, they can be very strong and very successful. When the Jewish people are divided, they get vulnerable to all kind of attacks.
Thank you so much, Alex, for ending with a ray of light in all this darkness. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.